She was simply following a man into an office for a job interview. She believed she was walking toward a new career. Instead, she was walking into the office that would change her life forever. 5 hours later, security cameras caught her leaping from a third-story window, plunging over 10 meters to the concrete below. As she lay there, severely injured but still breathing, the man walked right up to her. Instead of calling for help, he dragged her broken body into his car. These would become the final images of her alive. He thought burying her in the deep mountain wilderness will hide his secret forever. If one old man hadn't looked out his window at that exact moment, the truth about what happened to her would still be buried beneath the earth today. I'm Richard, and you're watching Dark Soak. This is a channel where I cover dark case files from the Eastern world that barely makes it to the West. Stories buried in regional news and lost in translation. This is the story of He Ling, a woman who left for a job interview and ended up buried in a shallow mountain grave. What happened in those 5 hours that made jumping from a third-floor window her only way out? And why did the man who interviewed her choose to bury her alive instead of calling for help? Let's get into it. Most of us know someone who struggled to find work. Maybe it was a friend after graduating, a parent who was laid off, or maybe you've experienced it yourself. At first, unemployment feels like a temporary setback, but as the weeks turn into months, doubt begins to replace confidence. Finding a job stops being just about earning a paycheck. It becomes proof that your life is finally moving forward again. By 2022, that same pressure was being felt by millions of young people across China. As the economy slowed and competition for stable jobs intensified, even university graduates found themselves delivering food or taking temporary jobs simply to get by, while continuing the search for something better. Every interview carried a little more weight than the last. He Ling was one of those young people, but unlike many around her, she refused to let herself become cynical. She still believed the right opportunity was out there. He Ling was 28 years old. To her parents, she had always been a sensible and well-behaved daughter. When she was still young, her parents made the difficult decision to leave their hometown in Sichuan and travel more than 1,500 kilometers to Fujian for work. Like millions of Chinese families chasing better opportunities, they spent years living apart from their daughter so she could have chances they never had. The money they earned paid for her dance training, where she showed a natural talent from an early age. Later, she attended university before eventually settling in Chengdu, determined to build a life of her own. Like many young adults in 2022, Ling was still searching for stable work, but those who knew her said she never let the uncertainty define her. She kept applying, kept attending interviews, and kept believing that eventually someone would give her a chance. Then one day, that chance finally seemed to arrive. She received a call inviting her to a job interview. She excitedly shared the news with her parents. It seemed promising, like one more step towards the future they had spent years working to give her. None of them could have imagined that it would be the last time they would speak to each other again. On the afternoon of October 6, 2022, Ling arrived at the office building where she had been told to meet her interviewer. Security cameras caught her walking into the building, looking at her phone. Moments later, she was greeted by a man. The two spoke briefly before heading inside together. Nothing about the interaction appeared unusual. The cameras followed the pair as they walked up the stairs, before eventually disappearing from view inside the office. 5 hours later, the same security camera captured He Ling falling from the third floor of the building. She had no clothes on her upper body. The fall was more than 10 meters onto the concrete below, leaving her with multiple severe injuries. She was still breathing, and the surveillance footage showed that she was still moving. Less than a minute later, the same man she had entered the building with ran downstairs and approached her, shining his phone flashlight on her body. Instead of calling for an ambulance or asking anyone nearby for help, he briefly checked her condition before dragging her half-naked body away from the stairs and into a more secluded area. He then went to the underground parking garage, drove his white SUV to where Ling was lying, lifted her into the vehicle, and left the scene. That night, the man drove more than an hour northwest of Chengdu into the mountains. Just after midnight, he turned off the main road and drove onto a narrow mountain path before finally stopping near a small forest. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, a villager named Lu was suddenly awakened by the sound of a car engine. The mountains were usually silent at that hour, and hearing a vehicle so late at night immediately struck him as unusual. Curious, he walked over to his window and looked outside. In the darkness, he could make out a white SUV parked near the edge of the woods. Standing beside it was a young man holding a shovel, digging into the ground. The distance and darkness made it impossible to see exactly what he was doing, and after watching him for a short while, Lu eventually went back to bed, wanting to mind his own business. The next morning, however, the image stayed with him. The more he thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Why would anyone drive into the mountains so late just to dig a hole? Unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right, Lu decided to walk over and take a closer look. Following the fresh tire tracks tracks left behind by the SUV, he eventually came across a patch of soil that had clearly been disturbed. The earth looked freshly turned, as though something had been buried only hours earlier. Rather than digging it up himself, Liu trusted his guts and called the police. Within hours, investigators arrived on scene. As they carefully dug through the loose soil, they uncovered the body of a young woman buried just beneath the surface. The medical examiner estimated that she was between 25 and 30 years old. She had suffered multiple fractures throughout her body, and although there were no signs of SA, the examination suggested she had ultimately died from internal bleeding and organ failure after falling from a significant height. In other words, she didn't die instantly. Had she received emergency medical treatment at the time, there was still a chance she could have survived. As investigators processed the scene, Liu told them about what he had witnessed the previous night. He wasn't able to make out the man's face in the darkness, but he did remember one important detail. The white SUV's license plate ended with the characters 6M7. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Using the partial license plate, investigators began reviewing highway surveillance cameras around the area. Before long, they located a white SUV matching Liu's description and were able to recover its full license plate number. Vehicle registration records led them to a 30-year-old man named Liu Tao, a married installation worker from the area. Surveillance footage also confirmed that he was the one driving the SUV that night. Police immediately launched the search, alerting neighbor jurisdictions throughout Sichuan. It didn't take long until officers in Chengdu located Liu Tao and took him into custody for questioning. He didn't deny burying her. He admitted the young woman was 28-year-old He Ling and that he had hidden her body in the mountains. But then he spun his first lie. He claimed that He Ling was deeply troubled, that she had taken her own life, and that he had merely panicked and hid the body to avoid trouble. To verify Liu Tao's story and formally identify the victim, investigators contacted He Ling's parents, who was still working and living in Fujian. When the police called, her parents refused to believe what they were hearing. Just one day earlier, their daughter had sent them a WeChat message asking to borrow 5,000 yuan for an emergency. How could she have been dead if she had messaged them only hours before? They traveled back to Sichuan believing there had to be some mistake, but the moment they walked into the morgue, their world shattered. The young woman lying before them was their only daughter. Everyone realized the sickening truth. The text sent to her father wasn't from He Ling. She was already dead when that message was sent. Her killer was using her phone to rob her grieving parents. The timeline didn't match Tao's story. As investigators confronted him with the evidence, he quickly abandoned his original claim that He Ling had taken her own life in the mountains. This time he admitted she had fallen from the third floor of a commercial building in Chengdu, but insisted it had been an accident while he was helping her find a job. Police returned to the building and reviewed the surveillance footage. It confirmed that shortly after 3 p.m., Tao had met Ling outside and led her to the manager's office on the third floor. After that, both of them disappeared from view. There was no cameras inside the office, meaning whatever happened over the next 5 hours, only Tao knows. He claimed that he had gone downstairs to buy food shortly before Ling fell and only rushed back after hearing the impact. At first, investigators believed he had pushed her from the window, but when they reconstructed his movements, the timing doesn't add up. Even running at full speed, it would have taken him nearly 30 seconds to reach the third floor. Ling fell just 10 seconds after he re-entered the building. That single detail changed the entire investigation. If Tao hadn't pushed her, why did Ling jump? As detectives dug deeper into his background, they discovered there was never a real job interview. Tao wasn't a manager at the company at all. He was an installation worker who had been fired days earlier, but he had been contacting young, unemployed women by falsely claiming he could arrange job interviews. He admitted he had specifically chosen the empty office because the building was closed for a national holiday. Once they were inside, he spent hours pretending to interview He Ling before attempting to assault her. When she resisted and threatened to call the police, he took away her phone, cutting off her only way to ask for help. Investigators also discovered that before leaving the room, Tao had wedged the office door shut from the outside with a wooden stick, trapping He Ling inside. With no phone, no way to call for help, and believing her attacker could return at any moment, she searched desperately for another way out. Near the window, investigators found a flower pot beneath the windowsill and damage to the curtains. Just outside the building hung a section of construction safety net. Based on the physical evidence inside the office, investigators concluded that Ling had climbed onto the flower pot beneath the window. She was hoping to use it to climb down and escape, but the net immediately tore beneath her weight, sending her more than 10 meters onto the concrete below. The investigation ultimately determined that Ling hadn't jumped because she wanted to end her life. She jumped because after hours trapped inside the office, she believed it was her only chance to survive. They also concluded that even though Tao had never physically pushed Ling from the window, he had created the circumstances that left her believing it was her only escape. He had lured her into an an empty office under the promise of a job interview, attempted to assault her, taken away her phone, and blocked the only exit from the outside. By the time she reached the window, every safe way out had already been taken away from her. Even after Ling fell, Tao still had an opportunity to save her life. Surveillance footage and the medical examination showed that she was still alive after the fall, but instead of calling for an ambulance, he loaded her into his SUV, drove more than an hour into the mountains, buried her in a shallow grave, possibly still alive, and returned to Chengdu as if nothing had happened. The following day, he even used Ling's phone to send a message to her father, pretending to be her, asking to borrow 5,000 yuan for an emergency. Believing his daughter was still alive, her father transferred the money without hesitation. On December 26, 2023, the case went to trial. The court rejected Tao's account of the incident, ruling that although he had not physically pushed Ling from the window, his actions directly led to the circumstances that forced her to jump. The court also found that by failing to seek medical assistance after the fall and instead burying her while she was still critically injured, Tao had intentionally deprived her of any remaining chance to survive. He was convicted of intentional homicide and fraud. He was sentenced to death and ordered to compensate He Ling's parents for their loss. When you strip away the police reports, the courtroom files, and the timeline of that afternoon, you're left with a much more unsettling truth. Hope is one of the most powerful things we have. It keeps us moving forward after rejection, pushes us to keep trying after disappointment, and convinces us that tomorrow might be different from today. But under enough pressure, hope can also become the very thing that makes us vulnerable. People like Tao understand that. They don't force their victims through the front door. They invite them in with the promise of something they've been searching for: a job, a relationship, a better future. They don't prey on weakness, they prey on hope. When He Ling found herself trapped inside the office, her phone gone and the door wedged shut from the outside, jumping wasn't an act of surrender. It was the last decision left to someone who refused to give up. She chose a 10-meter drop into open air because at that moment it offered her a better chance of survival than staying inside the room with the attacker. The tragedy of this case is that the same hope that led He Ling into the office was the hope that carried her to the window. She believed there was still a way out. She believed she could survive. In the end, He Ling didn't jump because she wanted to die. She jumped because she still wanted to live. I'm Richard and this was Dark Silk. If you have any thoughts about this case, leave a comment below. I read every single one. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to keep supporting me and follow these hidden regional cases from the East. Stay safe out there and I'll see you next week.